Does everyone's brains hurt today? Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think you're starting to realize how complex search has become. A lot of SEO teams right now are doing everything right and still losing, and that's usually a sign that the rules have changed and nobody told them. It's like back in high school when you'd miss a week of school, and you come back and everyone moved on without you, and you're just trying to figure out what's going on. Everything's over your head. It's sort of like that. Before I jump in, quick context. I'm not an SEO by trade. I'm a search engineer. And that distinction matters more now than it used to. Most of the industry is focused on observing outcomes, ranking outcomes, traffic, performance. And I've spent the last 20 years building the systems that create those outcomes. Ranking systems, content interpretation systems, and more recently, retrieval itself. I hold one of the most cited patents in SEO, including citations within Google's own patent portfolio. So what I'm about to show you today is not a theory, it's not a framework, it's how these systems actually behave. And once you see it, a lot of what's happening right now will start to make sense. Is AI seeing the brand you think you've built, or a completely different one? Because whether we realize it or not, AI systems are understanding your brand, and that understanding determines whether or not you show up at all. Today, I want to walk you through something that most teams don't realize. Your brand exists as a mathematical object inside of AI systems. And whether you control it or not, that's what determines whether or not you show up or you disappear. Most of the teams I work with are doing everything right. They're publishing content, they're optimizing pages, they're building authority. If this were 2015, they'd be winning. But something strange happens. Their rankings plateau, then drift, then disappear from the queries that matter. Not because they'd stopped doing SEO, but because search changed. It's no longer between keywords and links. It's meaning, intent, and embeddings. Pages don't just compete on keywords anymore. They compete on alignment. So while they add content, they often increase drift. While they add optimization, they reinforce the wrong signals. While they build authority, they amplify the wrong footprint. From the outside, it looks right. But in the inside, they're moving further and further away. You ask AI a question, and your brand isn't there. Not page 2, not page 10, just gone. You're not being selected. And the reason why is that search didn't just evolve, it fundamentally changed. How many times have we seen this before? The algorithm shifts, but the industry keeps doing the same thing, because nobody can actually see what changed inside of the system. That gap, that blind spot, is what I kept running into over and over again. That's what pushed me to start figuring out how to make those shifts visible so we're not always reacting after the fact. This is the most important shift. If you're not retrieved, you do not exist to AI. There's no ranking to fall back on, no second page, no almost there. If your page isn't selected, it's as if it wasn't even ever written. Think about a user asking a question. The system pulls a handful of passages, and that's the entire universe they see. If you're not in that set, you don't get impressions, you don't get clicks, you don't even get considered. It's the difference between cited and being invisible, between being the answer or not existing at all. So this isn't about moving from position 5 to position 3 anymore. It's about crossing a boundary from excluded to included. And if you don't cross that boundary, nothing else matters. AI doesn't see pages the way that we've trained ourselves to think about it. It's not looking at a URL. It's not evaluating a page as a unit. And it definitely doesn't care about your layout, your word count, or your H1 words, heading structure. What it sees instead is meaning. It breaks everything down into smaller pieces, passages, fragments, ideas. and it turns them into mathematical representations. Those representations capture context, relationships, intent. So instead of asking, is this page about the topic, the system is asking, does this meaning align with the query? And that's a completely different game, because now your content isn't competing as a page, it's competing as a collection of meanings. And only the ones that best match the query get pulled into the answer. So here's what actually happens. Your content doesn't stay as a page. It gets broken apart, not into pages, into chunks. Small passages, sections, individual ideas, each one evaluated on its own. A paragraph from your guide can compete with independently. A definition halfway down the page can be pulled out and used as the answer. Even a short sentence, if it aligns perfectly, can outperform an entire well-optimized page. The system isn't reading your page top to bottom anymore. It's scanning for the best pieces on that page, comparing those pieces to the query, to other sources, to the entire corpus. Most of the page never even makes it into consideration. Even only the highest aligned chunks make it into the consideration set. So you're not competing page versus page, you're competing passage versus passage. So each chunk is converted into a vector, which is just a fancy way of saying it becomes a coordinate in space based on meaning. Not keywords, not exact phrases, but the underlying intent of the text. Every chunk gets mapped somewhere into this multi-dimensional space. So now you can measure how close one idea is to another. Two chunks that can use completely different wording can sit right next to each other if they express the same concept. And two chunks that share the same keywords can be really far apart if they're actually talking about different things. For example, how to fix a leaking pipe and how to repair a plumbing leak end up very close, but Apple nutrition facts and Apple stock earnings drift far apart, even with the same word. That's the shift. Relevance becomes distance. The closer your chunk becomes to the query, the more likely it's going to be retrieved. The further away it becomes invisible. And when you do this across your entire site, every chunk gets mapped into that coordinate space. Similar meaning ends up close together. So all the passages about the same topic start to group, even if they're on different pages. Your how-to guides, your definitions, your supporting content, they begin to overlap. Not because you organized them that way, but because the system sees it as related. So instead of isolated pages, you get dense area of meaning. One cluster around the core topic, another around the intent. All the plumbing and repair content pulls into one region, while installation and cost content forms a completely separate cluster. This is how the system understands topical depth now, not by page hierarchy, but how your content groups together. And over time, your site takes on a shape defined by these clusters. You don't choose these clusters. You don't label them. You don't control them directly. They emerge. They form based on what your content actually says, not what you intended to say. Every paragraph, every section, every part of the page contributes to that. And so if all of the content is aligned, your cluster becomes dense and clear. And if not, it becomes sparse and misaligned and hard to understand. The system sees 3 different clusters, not one. That's the reality, not the branding. The truth of what your site is about, essentially, are these clusters. And inside these clusters, there's a center point. Not something you define, the system has already calculated that. It's the average position of all of these chunks, the middle of the meaning. Every piece of content pulls that slightly towards its direction. So if your content is consistent, that center becomes tight and clear. And if it's scattered, the center becomes diluted and vague. That center point is what we call your centroid. It represents what your site actually means mathematically. Not your homepage title, not your branding. And this is the part that most people miss. This point is your brand to AI. Not what you say you are, what the system has calculated you to be. Not your homepage, not your messaging doc, not your brand guidelines. It's the combined signal of everything you've published. Every paragraph, every page, every topic, pulling the center in that direction. If those signals aren't aligned, your brand becomes diluted. So when AI decides what you're relevant for, it's not reading your positioning, it's measuring your centroid. And when we measure this, we often see something very uncomfortable. What you think your brand is and what your centroid says are not the same. You might believe you're focused on one core topic, but your content is pulling in multiple directions. Your blog says one thing, and your product pages say another. Your resources page says another. To you, it feels cohesive, but to the system, it's fragmented. Your centroid doesn't care about intent. It reflects the math of everything you've ever published. So when there's a gap between perception and reality, it shows up immediately. Your centroid tells the truth. And the way we measure that is distance. Distance between your pages and your centroid, between queries in your centroid. How close is this page to what your site is actually representing? How close is the query to the center of your meaning? If the distance is small, you're aligned. You get retrieved. If the distance is large, you're misaligned. You get filtered out. It doesn't matter how well the page is written or how strong the domain is. If it's far away in that space, it's not going to even get selected. So everything reduces down to proximity. Distance becomes the signal that decides visibility. Distance is truth in these systems. So in plain English, this becomes, do your pages agree with your brand? Are they reinforcing the same core meaning or introducing competing signals? Does each page pull in the same direction or fragment the overall picture? Because every page either strengthens that centroid or distorts it. A tightly aligned site becomes easier to retrieve. A scattered site becomes harder to trust, harder to select. So the real question isn't, is this page optimized? It's, is this page aligned with everything else that we've published? Or are we pulling it in different directions? So how does retrieval actually work? Let's walk through this. A query comes in, and the system doesn't treat it like text. It interprets the meaning behind it, the intent, the context, even the ambiguity. Best CRM for small business isn't just keywords, it's comparison, scale, use case. Then it converts that into a vector, a coordinate in the same space your content lives in. So now the query has a position, just like your chunks do. From there, the system looks outward, searching for the closest matches. Not pages, but individual chunks that sit nearest to that point. It's comparing meaning, not warning, measuring distance, not keyword overlap. And the chunks that are closest are the ones that get retrieved and used in the answer. And then that query is compared, not to pages, but to centroids. Not individual URLs, not isolated pieces of content, but the centers of meaning. They're often influenced by your site's centroid. System's asking, what is the closest to this query, the centroid? What's most aligned with what this query represents? So before any page is even considered, the system's narrowing the field. It prioritizes the centroids and the chunks that sit closest to that prompt. If your chunks are far apart, your pages may never even be considered. If it's close, then it enters the candidate set. So retrieval doesn't start at the page level. It starts at the cluster level. And this is the key moment. You're either eligible or you're ignored. There's no, we'll rank you lower. No, you're on page 2. If your centroid isn't close enough, you don't even enter the candidate set. Your pages aren't crawled, they're not scored, they're not compared. They simply don't exist in the context of that question. Two sites could have equally strong content, but only one is even considered. The other one never even gets a chance to compete. This is where most of the visibility is lost today, at the retrieval layer. Before rankings, before links, before any traditional signals that we're talking about today, the real battle isn't moving up positions, it's becoming eligible in the first place. Everything else is downstream of this single decision. All of this happens before ranking. This is not ranking. This happens before ranking. This is the stage where the system decides what even gets considered before scores, before positions, before links or traditional signals matter. The candidate set is formed, and everything outside it is gone. You don't lose, you just never enter the game. Your pages aren't compared, your content is evaluated, your authority doesn't apply. It's like having the best answer, but never being invited into the conversation. No impressions, no clicks, no data to even tell you what went wrong. That's why it feels like sometimes that things just stop working, because the system didn't push you down, it filtered you out. Only after that do pages compete. Only once you're in the candidate set do things like content quality, links, structure matter. That's when individual chunks are compared and scored and selected to form the answer. That's the part most SEOs are used to thinking about. But all of this happens after a much earlier filter. If your centroid is off, you may never reach this stage at all. Your pages won't be evaluated, your improvements won't be registered, your signals won't be seen. You could rewrite content, build links, and nothing moves, because the system already decided you're not close enough to the query. So the issue isn't that you're losing, it's just that you're not even being considered. And until that alignment is fixed, nothing downstream matters. Now here's the real problem. Most brands look identical to AI. They use the same sources, the same stats, the same agents, the same structure, same keywords, same headings, same best practices repeated across the web. So their centroids collapse into the same region. All that content pulls to the same point in space. No separation, no unique signal, no distinct position. In other words, AI can't tell you apart. You're one of many sources saying essentially the same thing. And when everything looks the same, the system doesn't need all of it. It just picks a few. The rest never even get retrieved. So the problem isn't just competition, it's centroid convergence. And that means you're competing before ranking even starts. Not on pages, not on links, not on traditional signals, but on position in that space. You're competing to be closer to the query than everyone else, competing to have a clearer, tighter, more distinct centroid, competing to stand apart from everything else that looks the same. Because once that candidate set is formed, most of the competition is already over. All of it happens upstream before any rankings are applied, all inside the embedding space. I call this cluster collision. It's when your content is in the exact same region as everyone else, with no real separation. Same signals, same structure, same meaning, all compressed into the same space. It's like 10 brands answering the same question with the same idea, but with identical intent. Or showing up to a race where everyone's standing on the same starting square. Or 10 resumes all saying the same thing, and only 2 are going to get picked. And when that happens, the system doesn't need all of you. It just selects a few representatives and ignores the rest. That's why so many brands never show up consistently, even when they're doing everything right. They're not failing best practices. They're colliding with everyone else using them. This is the silent killer of visibility. So SEO is no longer about pages. It's not about tweaking individual URLs, titles, headers in isolation. It's not a checklist you apply one page at a time, because the system isn't looking at your site that way anymore. It's seeing the aggregate, the combined signal of everything you've published, like a reputation that forms over time, whether you control it or not. Or like a voice made up of every sentence that you've ever said. It's about identity, what you consistently represent in that space. Whether your content tells one clear story or many conflicting ones. Because in this system, you don't rank pages, you project meaning. And that meaning is what gets retrieved. You don't need better content, not more words, not longer guides, not another version of what already exists, because better versions of the same thing still land in the same space. They still map to the same region with everyone else doing it right. It's like speaking louder but saying the same thing as everyone else. You need a distinct centroid, a position in that space that is clearly yours, something that the system can separate, recognize, and retrieve consistently. Because if your meaning isn't distinct, your content won't be either. When your centroid is distinct, you're no longer sitting in the same crowded region as everyone else. You're not competing with dozens of near identical signals. It's like stepping out of a packed room into your own space, or being the only clear answer instead of one of many similar ones. So you face less competition during retrieval, fewer collisions, fewer substitutes, fewer reasons to be skipped. The system doesn't have to choose between you and dozens of others. It recognizes you as the closest match. And more visibility means more consistency, not because you're ranked higher, but because you're selected more often. But here's the hard part. You have to stabilize this. It's not something you set once. It's something you maintain over time. Every new page, every update, every piece of content pulls that centroid, like a compass that shifts slightly with every movement that you make, or a brand voice that drifts if too many people speak out of alignment. So if you're not careful, you slowly lose clarity without even realizing it. Not just optimizing your pages. What does optimization even mean anymore? More keywords, better headings, longer content? Or is it making sure that everything you publish reinforces the same core meaning? Because in this system, optimization without alignment creates drift. And drift is what breaks consistency. That means measure, adjust, remeasure. You don't set it once and move on. You keep recalibrating. Like tuning an instrument, small changes, constant feedback. Measure, adjust, remeasure. Over and over. Because every piece of content shifts the system slightly. And without feedback, that drift compounds. This isn't a one-time optimization. It's an ongoing control loop, continuous alignment. And when you do that, you create a self-healing system. Not something fragile that breaks every time you publish, but something that stabilizes itself as it grows. Like a thermostat, constantly adjusting to maintain the target temperature, where drift gets corrected automatically. New pages don't pull you off center, they reinforce it. Misaligned content gets identified early before it compounds. Updates bring things back into alignment instead of introducing more noise. So instead of guessing what's working, you have a feedback loop. Instead of reacting after performance drops, you stay on course continuously. The system doesn't just grow, it stays aligned as it grows. The problem is, you can't see any of this. You can't see the space, you can't see the clusters, you can't see your centroid, you can't see how your content is positioned or how it's drifting over time. You can't see how close you are to a query or why a competitor is getting retrieved instead. All of it is happening behind the scenes, inside a system you don't have visibility into. So most teams are guessing. They publish content, they optimize pages, they follow best practices, and then they wait, hoping that something moves. When it doesn't, they change tactics, add more content, build more links, but they're reacting to outcomes, not understanding causes. And over time, that guesswork compounds into drift. Without visibility, you can't correct. You can only react. So at this point, this all might feel very abstract. Clusters, centroids, embedding space, it sounds theoretical, right? Like something is happening behind the curtain that you can't actually act on. But it's not actually abstract. It's just unfamiliar. Because everything we talked about today is grounded in math. Every chunk has a position, every cluster has a shape, every centroid has a coordinate. Distances can be calculated, relationships can be compared, and movements can be tracked. This is all measurable. Where your centroid sits as a real position in that space. So instead of reacting to outcomes, you observe the system itself. And once you can see this, you can start to control it. Because now you're not guessing anymore. You can see where you are, where you're drifting, and how to correct it. So the questions change. You're not asking, why didn't I rank? You're asking, was I even eligible? How far are my chunks from the centroid? Which pages are reinforcing my identity, and which ones are pulling it apart? Where am I drifting? How do I bring this back into alignment? In closing, your brand is already a mathematical object. It already exists in this space, whether you see it or not, defined by every page, every paragraph, every signal you've published. It has a position, a shape, and a center. And that's what the system uses to understand your brand. Not your intent, not your messaging, but the aggregate of your content. You don't get to choose that. You don't get to opt out. It's being calculated continuously, with or without your awareness. You only get to choose whether you control it or not, whether you shape that identity intentionally or let it drift over time. With every new piece of content, will it fragment it or bring it into alignment? Because either way, the system is deciding what you are. The only question is, are you part of that process or reacting to it after the fact? So the question becomes, is AI seeing the brand that you've built or the one your content created? Because if you control your centroid, you control your visibility. So I'll leave you with this. Your brand is already a mathematical object inside these systems. You don't get to choose that. You only get to choose whether you can see it, whether you can measure it, and whether you can control it. And right now, most teams are still guessing. Thank you very much.
Vector speakers bring slides. Jeff brings a content strategy intervention with charts. As co-founder of MarketMuse and SVP of strategy at Site Improve, Jeff has spent years helping teams